I still remember the exact second my heart stopped dot. It was a bright Saturday afternoon. The kind of day that looks perfect in photos and feels empty when you are the one standing outside looking in. I was sitting in my car across the street from a small white chapel, the windows rolled down just enough to let the summer air in. I had not planned to be there. I told myself I was only driving past. I told myself I was strong enough now, but my hands were shaking on the steering wheel, and my throat felt tight the way it does when you are about to cry and refuse to let the tears fall. A week. Only 1 week had passed since the judge signed the final papers and called our marriage over. 1 week since I walked out of that courtroom with nothing but a thin folder of documents and the hollow, feeling that 7 years of my life had been erased with a signature. And already, my ex-husband was standing at the altar, marrying the woman he had always called his dream. I watched the doors open. Guests in soft pastels filed inside. Then I saw him, Michael, the man who once promised me forever under the same kind of clear sky. He looked calm, almost happy, the kind of calm that used to settle me when I was anxious. Now it only made the air feel colder. And then she appeared, the bride, white dress, soft veil. The way she moved was graceful, practiced, like someone who had rehearsed this moment in her mind for years. I leaned forward without meaning to. Something about the shape of her face, the way she tilted her head when she smiled at him, pulled at a memory I could not yet name. My pulse jumped. I knew that face. I had seen it before. Not in a photograph of a stranger. Somewhere closer, somewhere that should have been impossible, but what I didn't know that day was how deep the recognition would cut, or how completely it would change the story I thought I had already finished living. My name is Elena. For most of my adult life, I believed I was living a quiet, ordinary love story. Michael and I met when I was 24 and he was 26. I was working late shifts at a small bookstore downtown, the kind with creaky floors and the smell of paper and rain. He came in one rainy Tuesday looking for a book on architecture he claimed he needed for work. He stayed for 2 hours talking about nothing important. The next day, he came back with coffee. The day after that, he brought flowers that did not match any occasion. By the end of the month, we were having dinner 3 times a week. By the end of the year, we were talking about forever. We married on a cool autumn afternoon in a garden behind an old stone church. I wore a simple dress my mother helped me choose. Michael looked at me like I was the only person in the world. In the photographs from that day, we both look young and certain. I used to keep those photographs in a box on the top shelf of our closet. After the divorce, I could not bring myself to open the box. Some memories are too sharp to touch. For the first few years, everything felt soft and possible. We rented a small apartment with big windows. I kept working at the bookstore while taking online classes at night. Michael was rising at the design firm where he worked. We talked about buying a house someday, about children someday, about growing old on a porch somewhere quiet. We laughed easily. We forgave small things quickly. I thought that was what love looked like when it was real. Looking back now, I can see the thin cracks that started forming long before the walls came down. The late nights that became later. The phone that stayed face down on the table. The way he would go quiet when I asked about his day, and then change the subject with a smile that no longer reached his eyes. I told myself he was stressed. I told myself every marriage has seasons. I told myself I was being too sensitive. The first real break came on a Thursday evening in late spring. I came home early because the bookstore closed for inventory. The apartment was dark, except for the glow of the television that had been left on. Michael's laptop sat open on the kitchen counter. A message notification glowed on the screen. I did not mean to look. My eyes simply moved before my mind could stop them. The name on the message was not one I knew. The words were soft, familiar, the kind of words people only use when they have been speaking to each other in secret for a long time. My stomach dropped. I stood there for a long time with my keys still in my hand, listening to the quiet of the apartment that no longer felt like ours. When Michael came home, I asked him. He denied it at first. Then he grew angry. Then he grew quiet. Then he said the words that would live in my chest for months afterward. It doesn't mean anything. But it did. It meant everything. The months that followed were a slow unraveling. Conversations that turned into arguments. Silence that filled the rooms like smoke. Nights spent staring at the ceiling while he slept facing the wall. I tried. I suggested counseling. He said he was too busy. I suggested we take a trip to remember who we used to be. He said the timing was wrong. Slowly, the hope I had been carrying began to feel heavy instead of light. By the time we finally sat across from each other at the mediation table, the love had already left the room. What remained was paperwork and the careful language of people who no longer trusted each other with their softer edges. The divorce was finalized on a Tuesday morning. I signed my name. He signed his. The judge spoke. And just like that, the life I had built was over. I walked out into the sunlight, feeling strangely weightless and completely empty at the same time. Friends told me I would feel better with time. My mother held my hand and said some endings are actually beginnings in disguise. I nodded because it was easier than explaining. The hollow place behind my ribs, 1 week later. I was sitting in my car outside, a chapel watching the man who had just divorced me marry someone else. And then I saw her face clearly. As she turned toward the doors, the recognition hit me like cold water. I knew her, not as a stranger, not as a face from a magazine or a social media post. I knew her from a time in my life I had tried very hard to forget. A time when I was younger, more trusting, and far more fragile than I am now. Her name was Sophia, and the last time I had seen that face, it had been the face of the woman who nearly destroyed me once already. The memory rose so fast it left me breathless. Sophia and I had met when I was 19. We were both working summer jobs at a small cafe near the university. She was outgoing in the way that makes people lean closer when she speaks. I was quieter, more careful. Somehow we became friends. The kind of friends who share shifts and secrets and late night walks home. She told me about the boy who had broken her heart. I told her about the family I was trying to hold together after my parents' separation. We laughed a lot. We trusted each other with the soft parts of ourselves. Or at least I thought we did. Near the end of that summer, I started seeing someone. His name was Daniel. He was kind in a quiet way. He made me feel seen. Sophia met him once when he came to pick me up after a shift. She smiled. She said he seemed perfect for me. A week later, she asked if she could join us for coffee because she was feeling lonely. I said, of course. I wanted my friend to be happy too. What I did not know was that Sophia had already decided she wanted what I had. The betrayal unfolded slowly, the way rot spreads under paint. Daniel grew distant. Sophia stopped answering my messages as quickly. I found them together one evening outside the cafe after closing, standing closer than friends stand. When I confronted her, she cried. She said it had been a mistake. She said she never meant to hurt me. She said she was sorry. I believed her because I wanted to. 2 weeks later, I discovered the truth was deeper. Messages, photographs, plans they had made without me. Sophia had not stumbled into something. She had chosen it. She had looked at the life I was building and decided it should be hers. The friendship ended in a single conversation that left me shaking. Daniel left soon after. I spent the rest of that year learning how to breathe around the empty space they had created. I told myself I would never trust that easily again. I told myself I had learned the lesson. Years passed. I moved cities. I built a new life. I met Michael. I allowed myself to hope again. I never spoke Sophia's name out loud after that summer. I buried the memory so carefully that even I almost forgot the exact shape of her face until the day she walked into that chapel in a white dress and took the arm of the man who had just been my husband, sitting in the car that afternoon. I felt the old wound open as if no time had passed at all. My hands were cold. My vision blurred for a moment. I watched them disappear inside the chapel. I listened to the faint sound of music drifting through the open doors, and I understood something with terrible clarity. This was not a coincidence. Michael had spoken of his dream woman for years in the softest moments of our marriage. He would describe her in vague, careful words. Dark hair, a certain way of smiling. A lightness he said he had always been searching for. I used to laugh and tell him he was describing a fantasy. He would kiss my forehead and say he already had everything he needed. He had been describing. Sophia, I do not know how they found each other. I do not know when the messages started or when the meetings began. I only know that while I was signing divorce papers, they were already planning a wedding. While I was packing boxes in an apartment that no longer felt like home, she was choosing a dress. The speed of it was not accidental. It was deliberate. It was the final cut. That night, I drove home in silence. The apartment I had moved into after the separation felt smaller somehow. I sat on the edge of the bed with the lights off and let the full weight of it settle. The man I had loved, the friend who had once destroyed me, together, married, 1 week after the end of everything I thought was mine. Anger came first, hot and sharp. Then the older pain rose underneath it, the one I thought I had already survived. I cried until my chest hurt. I walked the length of the small living room again and again because sitting still felt impossible. At some point near dawn, I opened my laptop and began searching. I needed to know how deep the connection went. What I found over the following days did not soften anything. Photographs from months earlier. Subtle ones. A cafe table. A shared look in a crowd. Comments under old posts that suddenly made sense. Sophia had been present at the edges of Michael's life longer than I had realized. Perhaps longer than the final year of our marriage. The dream woman had not appeared after the divorce. She had been waiting in the wings while I was still trying to hold everything together. Realization changed something in me. For weeks after the divorce, I had been the woman who stayed quiet. The woman who accepted the ending with dignity. The woman who told friends she was fine because explaining the truth felt too heavy. Seeing Sophia's face at that altar broke the last of that careful silence. I began to look closer at everything. I requested copies of financial records from the final year of the marriage. I reviewed old emails I had once ignored. I spoke to a mutual acquaintance who had always been careful with her words and finally asked the questions I had been too afraid to voice. Piece by piece, a clearer picture formed. Michael had not simply fallen out of love with me. He had been building an exit, quiet transfers, conversations about future plans that never included my name. A version of our life that was already being rewritten while I was still living in the old one, and Sophia had been part of that rewriting. The night I understood the full shape of it, I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of tea that had gone cold and felt something shift inside my chest. The grief was still there. The betrayal still burned. But underneath it, a different feeling had begun to rise. Not rage exactly. Something steadier. Something that felt like the moment you stop asking why it happened and start deciding what you will do next. Was no longer only the woman who had been left. I was the woman who knew the truth, and the truth, once you stop running from it, becomes a kind of power. I did not set out to destroy anyone. I set out to stop living inside a story that had been written without my consent. The first step was small. I gathered every piece of information I had found and organized it carefully: dates, messages, financial movements, the quiet pattern of a marriage that had been ending long before the papers were signed. I did not post anything publicly. I did not send angry messages in the middle of the night. I waited until the timing was clean. 2 weeks after the wedding, Michael and Sophia returned from a short trip they had called a honeymoon. Social media showed smiling photographs, soft captions, the performance of a perfect beginning. I looked at those photographs once and closed the laptop. Then I reached out to the one person who could make the truth land where it needed to. Michael's older sister, Claire, had always been kind to me. During the divorce, she had stayed neutral in public, but private messages had shown she was troubled by how quickly everything ended. I asked to meet her for coffee. I brought the folder. I did not dramatize. I simply laid out what I knew and let her read. Claire was quiet for a long time. When she finally spoke, her voice was steady. "I always wondered," she said. "He changed so much in that last year." I thought it was stress. I didn't want to believe it was this. She did not promise me anything. She only said she would think. That was enough. What followed happened without my direct involvement, and that was important to me. Claire spoke to their mother. Their mother asked questions Michael could not easily answer. Old friends who had stayed silent began to connect pieces they had noticed but never voiced. Within a month, the carefully polished image of the new marriage had cracks running through it. Sophia's past was not as distant as she had hoped. People from the university years remembered the summer she had moved through other people's relationships like open doors. A former coworker from the cafe reached out after seeing the wedding photographs and shared her own quiet story of being pushed aside. None of it was dramatic in the way movies show. It was simply the slow return of truth to a place where lies had been living comfortably. Michael tried to control the narrative at first. He called me once. His voice was tight. "Why are you doing this?" I answered honestly, "I'm not doing anything to you. I'm only refusing to keep your secrets anymore." He hung up. The consequences arrived in ordinary ways. The design firm where Michael worked valued discretion. When questions about his personal life began to surface in professional circles, opportunities that had once been certain became uncertain. Sophia found that the social circle she had stepped into was smaller and more cautious than she expected. Invitations slowed. Conversations grew careful. The dream that had been built so quickly began to show its thin places. Did not celebrate. There were nights when the old ache returned, and I had to remind myself that justice is not the same as vengeance. I had not set out to leave them in ruins. I had set out to stop carrying the weight of someone else's choices in silence. The difference mattered to me. Months passed. I moved to a different neighborhood. I returned to the bookstore for a while, then took a position at a small publishing house where the work felt steady and quiet. I began walking in the mornings again. I slept through most nights. The sharp edges of the betrayal softened into something I could hold without. Bleeding. One evening in early autumn, I received a short message from Claire. "He's different now, quieter. I think he finally understands what he broke. Sophia left last month. I thought you should know." I read the message twice. Then I set the phone down and stepped outside onto the small balcony of my new apartment. The air was cool. Somewhere below, someone was cooking something that smelled like garlic and tomatoes. Life, ordinary and ongoing, continued. I thought about the girl I had been at 19, crying on the floor of a rented room after Sophia's first betrayal. I thought about the woman who had signed divorce papers with shaking hands. And I thought about the woman I was becoming, Now someone who could look at the full truth without needing to look away. The recognition that day outside the chapel had not only shown me who Michael had married. It had shown me that the same pattern can return wearing a different face until you decide you will no longer be the one who stays silent. I do not hate them. Hate is heavy, and I have carried enough weight. What I feel instead is a settled kind of clarity. Some people will take what is soft in you and use it without care. Some people will call it love while they are already planning the exit. The only real power left to you is the choice to stop protecting their story at the cost of your own. I closed the chapter the day I stopped explaining myself to people who had already decided not to listen. I kept the lessons. I released the rest. If you are listening to this and something in the story feels familiar, if you have ever sat in a car watching a life that was supposed to be yours walk away with someone else, know this. The recognition hurts. The truth is rarely gentle when it arrives. But on the other side of the pain is a quieter strength. The kind that does not need to shout. The kind that simply refuses to abandon itself again. I'm still here. I'm still becoming, and that, in the end, is the only revenge that ever truly mattered.